new heat on Donald Trump amid the Epstein uproar, as his latest attempt to slippery slide away from any accountability blows up in federal court. Today, in a scathing ruling, a judge essentially accusing Trump's DOJ of trying to fool the public with, quote, the illusion of transparency. Hours later, in a sign of how this is absolutely dogging Donald Trump, reporters are pressing him about that ruling. It happened during his press conference at the White House.
Thank you all. Thank you all very much.
Madam Attorney General, did the Justice Department appeal the Epstein decision today, Mr. President?
Did you hear that? Yeah, I didn't hear an answer either. Today's ruling concerned the DOJ's request to unseal grand jury material from probes into Epstein and his accomplice, Ghislaine Maxwell. For weeks, legal experts have said this is a red herring, arguing most of the information is already known and likely to shed very little light on the situation. Today, the federal judge, who has seen the material, echoing those criticisms and going even further, calling out and rebuking the Trump DOJ. Quote, the DOJ's entire premise that the Maxwell grand jury materials would bring to light meaningful new information about Epstein and Maxwell's crimes or the government's investigation into them is demonstrably false. Adding, quote, a member of the public appreciating that the Maxwell grand jury materials do not contribute anything to public knowledge might conclude that the government's motion for their unsealing was aimed not at transparency, but at diversion. And not at the full disclosure, but the illusion of such. It's unclear whether the DOJ will appeal as time goes by. This is certainly getting weirder. Trump veered from calling it a, quote, hoax to saying now the Democrats are hiding something. This weekend, J.D. Vance saying Trump wants to be, quote, fully transparent while admitting in the very next breath that the administration is still working on that whole transparency thing.
The president has said very clearly, because we've had other meetings about that, is that he wants us to be fully transparent and he wants the credible information out there. So we're working to compile the thousands and thousands of documents that are out there for full transparency.
Joining me now is Asha Rangappa, former FBI special agent and senior lecturer with Yale University, and Molly Jong-Fast, special correspondent with Vanity Fair and an MSNBC political analyst. Thank you so much. Her latest book is How to Lose Your Mother. Asha, we'll start with you. I want to make this clear because I think that sometimes people get caught up in the sort of nuances and details of how these judges are ruling one way or another. The judge basically said, look, there's no reason to go through this fight to unseal this information because it's not going to add anything new. Is that common, right? Is it common for a judge to say that, look, unsealing this isn't going to add anything to the case. You're not going to use me as a distraction. Is that something that we see often in these kinds of investigations, or is it just another sign of how desperate Trump is to find some sort of distraction?
I don't hear.
Asha, we're having a little bit of trouble.
Sorry about that. The federal rules of criminal procedure actually list out the exceptions for being able to release grand jury information, that it is secret unless it meets one of these exceptions. And the reasoning provided by the government here didn't meet any of those exceptions. So to answer your question, yes, it's common. The rules state that these are not released unless they meet certain criteria, which they don't in this case. So I think this was expected from the get-go. And it does seem like this was sort of a fait accompli and maybe a way to just blame the judges, like, oh, well, we can't do anything. They didn't release it. And you see the judge sort of taking pains to, make clear that this was a pointless request to be made in the first place.
Right. And Molly Jong-Fast, this is the thing about this. After a judge says, hey, there's nothing in here, there's nothing here, there's nothing in the magic hat, right? From a legal standpoint, what else does Trump have available to him? I mean, I know that they're probably scrambling around trying to find some other distraction, but what's the next thing that they might think of doing? Because if they can't stand on these sort of, unreleased pieces of testimony and, they've already moved Ghislaine Maxwell to a safer prison, What's their next legal strategy, or are they just going to try and throw as many other things at the wall in hopes that the American people and their own base stop paying attention?
Yeah, look, I think that this is a case where they have all this information. They can just release it, right? I mean, that's it. So, this is not some tricky, new math. Like, you have thousands of pages of paper, you have videos, you have some of the stuff can't be released because obviously it's pornography. But there's certainly quite a lot that you have. Pam Bondi was bragging about having it on her desk. So maybe there wasn't a client list, but there was certainly something on her desk. The whole plan about putting, this grand jury testimony was going to be much less than what they have. And there's a much higher standard for releasing grand jury testimony. So they knew, I feel like there was this was a way to try to buy time to keep it going, right? And then, but the answer is these people still haven't forgotten. They have all these documents. They can just release them. It's just a question of whether or not they want to release them, which, of course, they clearly do not want to release them.
Asha, I want to play this sound from Michael Cohen about what kinds of activities and behaviors Trump might have engaged in with Epstein, and get your thoughts on the other side.
As you know, I've made plenty of predictions, and I'm going to make another one here. Number one, I don't believe that Donald Trump was on Epstein's island. Now, is he in the file? Absolutely. Why? He's in the Black Book. He took free flights with Epstein down to Palm Beach. If he turns around and says that he was never on the island, rest assured, he's going to use that as the basis for why this whole thing, again, is a witch hunt against him.
So, Asha, here's the thing, and help me out here, because Michael Cohen certainly has a lot of amazing insight. Let's say Donald Trump comes out and says, yeah, I was never on the island. That's sort of the equivalent of saying, well, I wasn't in the bank when it was robbed, but I help everybody count the money and sell all the things from the safe deposit box with a fence, right? Like, what would be the value of this administration at this point trying to nitpick and geo-track where Trump is when it's still clear that he had a relationship with Epstein?
Yeah, this is what has puzzled me from the beginning, that he has had a relationship with Jeffrey Epstein. We knew that. It's pretty obvious that he's going to surface in these files in some way, right? I mean, because this is about activity that's going back into the late 90s. We know, for example, that Ghislaine Maxwell was actually recruiting girls from Mar-a-Lago. So, I mean, there's, he's going to be in this mix. And so this idea that he was pushing this theory, this conspiracy theory that and kind of getting people riled up, to me never made any sense, because if you know that you're in it and that's not going to be something you want out there, then why would you have done this? I want to just emphasize to Molly's point that the volume of information here is, dealing with evidence and witness interviews, victim interviews that go back to the investigation that happened in Southern District of Florida, the investigation that happened into Jeffrey Epstein that resulted in his charges, the investigation that resulted in Ghislaine Maxwell's indictment and charges, and an internal OPR investigation within the Department of Justice. So they are just sitting on a huge amount of information that this grand jury testimony is just pales in comparison in terms of what they have in their possession.
All I want to ask is, I want to play this out a couple weeks, maybe even a couple of months, to the potential end game here. Let's say, fine, the administration finally says we're going to release some of these files, and we see them and they're so redacted they look like piano keys on paper, right? Like we can't see anything. It's just black lines, white lines. Obviously, that brings no justice to the women who were victims, but just politically or legally, does that end it? I mean, does that end anything if they release a large number of highly redacted documents? Because it seems to me that at some point they're going to release something. I just doubt it's going to be anything that the public or any of the victims can actually use.
Well, this is the problem that I think Trump has gotten himself into, is it's very hard to get out of this. Like, any way you do it, it just makes more questions and more controversy and more content, and it reminds people that it's going on. The other thing I would add is, they're talking about having a bunch of people like the Clintons interviewed. Fine. do it. That's fine. I mean, I don't think anyone, we want the people who were in this file to be, everybody, the polling on the Epstein is like 80% of all Americans want the files released. It's like you can't get 80% of Americans to agree on anything. Okay. But the thing is, if you're going to have the Clintons talk, then you should have Alex Acosta, the guy from Trump's cabinet who did the sweetheart deal that was this like ridiculous deal where he was basically on work release.